The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
We get pretty deep into these episodes, and I realize some of them have spawned other media. This story for me was really interesting because it starts with a pretty affluent person. Had you ever read about these guys before we started talking about this one?
No.
I did not know that much about the family here, but I wanted to start with the victim in this case, which, depending on how you look at it, I guess your opinion can change as we talk about it. So this is a woman named Martha Sharp Crawford, and she was born in September of 1932. She was an heiress and a socialite. How her life starts, she's the only child of a man named George Crawford. George Crawford, at one point in time, was a chairman of a company called Columbia Gas and Electric. And his title, sort of in history, or his legacy, is that he was a utilities magnate. He was a big deal in the utility world. His wife and Martha's mom was a woman named Anna Laurie Warmack. She had the distinction of having been born on her father's personal railway carriage in Manassas, Virginia, en route from Hot Springs, Virginia, up to New York. So mom in this situation, Annie Laurie, she was known as Choo Choo as a child because she had been born on a train. Her father passes away, and she, at 3 years old, is worth a reported $100 million. In 1935. I don't know how they do those numbers. I don't know if it's adjusted for inflation. I know you've always said that that doesn't matter. Her mom, she got remarried. The man that she got remarried to was a man named Russell Aitken, who was a known sculptor and writer. Now, Anna Laurie, in her own right, she was the daughter of the founder of what was known as the International Shoe Company. The International Shoe Company today is a division of Furniture Brands International. So when they say heiress here for Martha Sharp Crawford, it is an heiress of the craziest nature. That is a lot of money between her parents. On July 20th in 1957, Martha gets married to a man named Alfred Edward Friedrich Vincenz Martin Maria Auersperg. He is the son of Prince Alois Maria Joseph Alexander von Auersperg and the prince's wife, Countess Henriette Maria Louise Larisch von Monaco. So she is marrying into Austrian, Austrian royalty. And their family had once ruled over the Principality of Auersperg. But the Austrian Empire had collapsed, and his family over time had become relatively impoverished. But technically, he was a prince. So this socialite had married a prince. Now, Alfred's older sister, who was Princess Henrietta von Auersperg, she had also married an heir. She had married Arndt von Bohlen and Halbach. He was the last male heir of the Krupp Company. They were the largest company in Europe at one point in time. They were a huge part of World War II. Martha and Alfred had met while he was teaching her to play tennis at a Swiss resort. So they had 2 children together. They named one of their children Anna Laurie after Martha's mom. She is actually the co-founder of the National Center for Victims of Crime. which I thought was kind of a cool thing. That's a 501c3 not-profit organization that's dedicated to providing advocacy for victims of all types of crime. She was married to Ralph Isham, who was the son of a diplomat named Hayward Isham. He was a foreign service officer. He was a huge deal in ending the Vietnam conflict. Their other child was Alexander, and he was a co-founder of the National Center for Victims of Crime with his sister, Anna Laurie. And he married an investment banker named Nancy Louise Weinberg. In 1965, Martha and Alfred get divorced. At that time, Martha's net worth was reported to be still over $75 million. Now, Prince Alfred, he's later going to die in 1992. He has a car accident in Austria in 1983, and he's in an irreversible coma for 9 years, and he finally dies. That's more in the future from all of this. On June 6, 1966, Martha gets married again. She gets married to a man named Klaus von Bülow. Klaus von Bülow had been an aide to a man named J.P. Getty. Do you know who J.P. Getty was?
No.
Okay, so Jean-Paul Getty was a American-born British petroleum magnate. He founded the Getty Oil Company in 1942. He was the son of another oilman named George Getty. He was a very, very rich man. They get married at the Brick Presbyterian Church in New York City. They have a daughter, and I don't know how you pronounce her name. She is still alive today. I think it's Cosima. It's Cosima. And Cosima will eventually be married to Count Riccardo Pavancelli. All right, by 1979, the marriage between Martha and Klaus is not going great. They have significant stresses and tensions in their marriage, and they start speaking about the possibility of getting divorced. On December 26, 1979, the whole family had gotten together at this mansion in Newport, Rhode Island that they owned. They were all there to celebrate Christmas together. Martha is found unresponsive, and she's rushed to the hospital where she slips into a coma. But they're able to revive her. After days of testing, doctors determined that the coma was the result of low blood sugar, and they diagnosed her as hypoglycemic. They warned her against overindulging in sweets or going too long without eating. Now, there's no foul play suspected at that moment. But in April of 1980, she's again hospitalized after she appears to be incoherent and disoriented. When this happens, the doctors reconfirm that she is suffering from reactive hypoglycemia. She is advised at this point to control her hypoglycemia by following a strict diet, limiting her sugar intake, and staying away from alcohol. So a year later, on December 21st of 1980, she's again celebrating Christmas with her family at this mansion. And the mansion was named Clarendon Court. This is in Newport, Rhode Island. Her family members observe her displaying confusion and a lack of coordination. They put her in bed, but the next morning, she's found unconscious on a bathroom floor. She's taken to the hospital where it became clear that she had suffered enough of a brain injury from whatever had happened to her that they believed that she would be in a persistent vegetative state. Clinically, what happened to her resembled a drug overdose, but some of the laboratory evidence done, specifically the blood testing, suggested that this is still a result of hypoglycemia. At this point in time, the lawyers get involved. The reason is there's so much money at stake. You have this Klaus and Martha maybe getting divorced. Their children get involved. Because of all of this having happened at the same time they were having marital problems, her children become suspicious that her being in this persistent vegetative state or this coma, this brain injury that she has, might have been the result of foul play by Klaus. Her two oldest children persuade Richard Kah, who's the former New York County District Attorney, to investigate the possibility that Klaus had attempted to murder their mom. So they gather all this evidence together and they bring it over to the Rhode Island prosecutors for Newport. They present the case to a grand jury, and the grand jury returned an indictment. And in July of 1981, Klaus is charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. Okay. I'm starting here because this story has always been interesting to me. I don't know if you're very familiar with it. Klaus von Bülow and the story of Martha Sharp, at that time, von Bülow, is interesting. Now, Martha is known as Sonny von Bülow, and there are characters in literature named after them. They are a huge deal. In fact, I think in the Lemony Snicket stories, Klaus and Sonny are named after them. Had you ever heard of any of this happening before?
No, I didn't know anything about any of this.
I get into these cases because it's like America's sort of aristocracy, so to speak, and their lives are fascinating to me. I think that this story would make the best limited series. It has been made into a movie before, but we're going to talk a little bit about how these trials go and what happens kind of after them. Alan Dershowitz, you know who Alan Dershowitz is, right?
Yes.
Okay, so he is Klaus's attorney at some point in here. I believe he gets hired on when he's at Harvard to come over and work on the appeal. But let's talk a little bit about Klaus. So Klaus was a son of a Danish author and playwright named Svend Borberg. And Klaus's mom was named Jonna von Bülow-Pluskow. His father was accused of being a Nazi collaborator for activities during the Second World War related to the Germans' occupation of Denmark. His father was later cleared. So Klaus goes to university, he gets a degree in law, and he becomes an apprentice in the legal profession. For reasons we don't necessarily know, Klaus chooses to go by the last name Bülow instead of his father's surname, Borberg. Now, his mother was the daughter of Fritz Bülow von Pluskow, and he had been the Danish Minister of Justice from 1910 to 1913. He was the president of the upper chamber of the Danish parliament from 1920 to 1922, and he was a member of the old Dano-German noble, quote, Bülow family. He's originally from a place called Mecklenburg. Mecklenburg is a historical region in northern Germany. Bülow graduated from Trinity College at Cambridge. He practiced law in London in the 1950s, where he became the aide to J. Paul Getty. He had a lot of things that he did for Getty, but one of the things that he did that really helped was he became very familiar with the economics of the oil industry, and this elevated him in Getty's eyes. Getty ends up writing about Bülow and said that he showed a remarkable forbearance and good nature as his occasional whipping boy. I thought this would be an insult. To me, it kind of feels like that would be an insult. If somebody called you their whipping boy, would you be insulted?
I feel like whipping boy is objectively insulting, and that anybody saying otherwise, maybe they meant to say something else.
When a prince was going through their education, anyone who was considered to be in line for the heir to some form of throne or lineage, they would give them a whipping boy. So when the prince did something that ordinarily would get them in trouble with the tutor or the teacher or whoever had happened to catch him doing something that was considered out of line or considered to be, quote, bad behavior, the whipping boy would take the punishment because the prince would not be punished because his royal status as an heir or being in the lineage towards the monarchy or the throne, the idea was that they were above the tutor and the tutor could not punish them. So the idea was that the prince would see their friend getting their butt beat and that it would provide like the same motivation as them getting their own butt beat.
That sounds about right for a society that would elevate somebody aristocratically.
Yeah. The idea was that Klaus kind of took the brunt of what was happening with John Paul Getty at different times. Klaus von Bülow leaves being Getty's aide in 1968. Now, he had gotten married to Sunny, who was Martha in our previous setup. She goes by Sunny at this point in her life, in 1966. He had been working off and on as a consultant to oil companies. And when he marries Sunny, she obviously already has a son and a daughter from her previous marriage. Now, the way that this rolls out in terms of trials, in 1982, Klaus, he finally is arrested when he's charged for the attempted murders of Sunny by the Rhode Island grand jury. They charge him twice for 2 occasions in 2 consecutive years of 2 attempted murders. So they're saying that the most recent incident of her having low blood sugar, or whatever you want to call this, was actually him drugging her with insulin. Kind of confusing, right?
It's not confusing to me.
Okay, well, so they're charging him for a 1979 incident and a 1980 incident where doctors said, this is low blood sugar. She's hypoglycemic.
Right, and so that doesn't really make any sense, does it? For them to then seek an indictment.
Right. Okay. And I can't help but wonder if this is financially motivated. But again, it's one of those things that, like, this story is weird. So the main medical and scientific evidence that is used against Klaus is that Sunny had low blood sugar, but a blood test showed high insulin levels. Now, this test is not repeated. There was a needle used as evidence against Klaus in court, with the prosecution alleging that he had used it with a vial of insulin to try and kill his wife. His mistress of 2 years is a woman named Alexandra Isles. Do you know who Alexandra Isles is?
I know as much about her as I do the rest of them.
She had been on Dark Shadows. So Dark Shadows, she played Victoria Winters. Dark Shadows was it was a soap opera that was a little more edgy, but it was focused on the Collins family up in Collinsport, New York, and it ran from 1966 until 1971. And it was a soap opera that introduced, quote, supernatural and paranormal occurrences. So she had been a part of this soap opera playing a character, and he's been having an affair with her. Her testimony in court was that, quote, he said they had been having a long talk about divorce that had gone on late into the night, and she had drunk a great deal of eggnog. And then he told me, I saw her take the Seconal. And then he went and said that the next day when she was unconscious, that he watched her knowing that she was in a bad way all day, and watched her and watched her. And finally, when she was at the point of dying, he said that he couldn't go through with it, and he called the doctor to save her life. This having been said, becomes a focal point later on. Seconal is an interesting thing. It's quinylbarbitone. It's secobarbital. It's a barbiturate derivative.
That he watched her take.
Right. This trial goes on, and Klaus is found guilty. He's sentenced to 30 years in prison in 1982. But he appeals, and this is the point where he hires Alan Dershowitz to come in and represent him. Now, Dershowitz had served as a consultant to the trial team, which had been run by a former federal prosecutor named Thomas Puccio.
I just want to make sure that I completely understand. This is attempted murder, right?
These are 2 counts of attempted murder.
Okay. Like, she didn't actually die.
No, she did not die.
Right. So he and the indictment.
But she is in a persistent vegetative state at the point of this trial.
Right, but the charges are still attempted murder.
Correct.
And the testimony, the most damning testimony that we've heard so far in the story is that he watched her take the medicine.
Right, but that he didn't do anything about it. He watched her, and he didn't do anything about it, knowing that she could potentially die from whatever was going on with her.
Right, and so if you watch somebody take medicine, I'm just saying, like, I don't know that rises. I mean, if he crushed it and put it in her drink, like, you see what I'm saying?
Right.
To me, it's two different things.
I agree with you. What Alexandra Isles brings up is the barbiturate. But what the prosecution has said is that he tried to kill her with insulin. Does that make sense? It's two different things that are happening. It's important for later.
Right, but the testimony, well, that's fine. Yeah.
Dershowitz puts together a team to try and deal with Cloud von Bülow's appeal. Now, this is a crazy team. So, first of all, you got Alan Dershowitz on there, who is a big name even now. But guess who else is on this team?
It could be anybody. Why don't you tell us?
So, Jim Cramer is on here, the Mad Money guy that's like screams about finances today. He's a television personality today. Mm-hmm. So Jim Cramer is a Harvard law student at the time, and so is Eliot Spitzer, who ends up being the 54th governor of New York. Mm-hmm. They're on this team for this appeal after the 1982 conviction. Mm-hmm. So Dershowitz and his team, they focus in on the discovery of a bag that contained needles and contained a vial of insulin. Now, Sonny's family had hired a private investigator to look into how she came to be in this coma. This is a guy named Edward Lambert. Edward Lambert, at the time, was working for Richard Coe, this is who they went to and said, I know you're a prosecutor in New York, but we really need something to take to the prosecutors in Rhode Island. How would you do this? And Edward Lambert had been told by several family members and at least one household employee that Klaus had recently been seen locking up a particular closet in the mansion at Clarendon Court that previously had always been left open. So the family, they hire a locksmith. Locksmith comes out to Clarendon Court, and they're going to have this locksmith pick the closet lock to see what's inside. Now, the kids, they lie to the locksmith, and they tell him that one of them had owned the house. They never say who, the boy or the girl, but they lie. So the three of them get there, and the locksmith insisted that they try again to find their key. So they do some digging, and the lawyer is there with them, the von Bülow's lawyer. So Richard Coe finds the key in Klaus's desk, and this key is able to unlock the closet. At this point, according to the private investigator, the locksmith, and the lawyer, in the original interviews, the locksmith gets paid for his trip and he leaves before the closet is actually opened. Later on, they recant that version and they insist that the locksmith had been with Edwin Lambert when he opens the door to the closet. This closet is where the bag of syringes and the insulin, which is used as the main evidence against Klaus von Bülow, had been found. So the Rhode Island Supreme Court gets a hold of this, and in 1984, it's presented to them, and they decide to overturn the two convictions for attempted murder from the first trial. So now we move to a second trial. At this point, the defense knows the prosecution's case, and you've got a little beefier defense team working on this. They end up calling 8 medical experts, all of whom are university professors. And they testify that Sonny lapsing into this state both times, so she lapses into it in 79 and then again in 80, but they say that it's not been caused by insulin, but by a combination of ingested, not injected, drugs, alcohol, and chronic health conditions. Those experts were John Corona, who was the chairman of neurology at Cornell, Leo Del Cortivo, who was a former president of the U.S. Toxicology Association, Ralph DeFranzo, who had been at the medical school at Yale University, Kurt Dubowski, who was a forensic pathology professor from University of Oklahoma, Daniel Foster, who had been at the med school for the University of Texas Southwestern, Daniel First, who was a medical professor at the School of Medicine at the University of Iowa, Harold Leibovitz, who was the director of clinical research at SUNY New York, Vincent Marks, who was a vice president at the Royal College of Pathologists and had been the president of Association of Clinical Biochemistry, and Arthur Rubinstein, who was a professor he might have actually been a dean at the University of Chicago's medical school. Cortivo testified that the hypodermic needle had been tainted with insulin on the outside, but not on the inside. It would have been dipped into the insulin, but not injected into the insulin where it could have been filled and then injected through the flesh, because they said that putting it into the flesh would have wiped the outside clean. At the time that Sonny had been admitted to the hospital, which was the fourth time, it was 3 weeks before the Christmas incident that lands her in her final coma. Doctors there showed that she had ingested at least 73 aspirin tablets. And that's a quantity that could only have been self-administered. And they felt like that indicated her state of mind at the time. Have you ever heard of somebody taking that many aspirin?
No, but I've heard of people taking excessive amounts of aspirin to kill themselves. It thins the blood is what the problem is.
Yeah.
And so you actually, I would say you can't die from that, but you absolutely can.
Yeah, you absolutely can die from aspirin. So the aftermath of all of this is he's let go at this point. Now, multiple people along the way here recant their testimony from the first trial, and they still think that the insulin was the most reasonable explanation for Sonny being in a coma. But none of them could say for sure what they had seen happening in the house. And Sonny's family remains convinced that Klaus had tried to murder her.
I feel like this entire thing is, so this is what I would ask myself. If she was not this heiress, would any of this have happened?
No, but it might. So the reason I picked this case is because I felt like it showed, first of all, quite a bit of privilege. In order for it to even get to the indictment, you're dealing with a lot of privilege, because they bring in this investigator and they bring in a prosecutor out of New York to kind of spoon feed them what they need to take to the Rhode Island prosecutor.
If the family had paid that much attention to her mental health, they would not be in this situation. It was afterwards, they decided they needed to pen this murder on this guy. And she's not even murdered.
Right.
That's the problem. And to me, it sounds pretty obvious that I don't feel like anything was sinister happening here, except perhaps he ignored the fact that she was trying to kill herself. There are murders that don't get this much attention and investigation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I noticed that you clarified this was an attempted murder early on.
Right, because
it would still be heinous, but yeah.
Well, it never becomes a murder, does it not? I mean, I don't even know how this ends, because we're literally talking about all this hullabaloo for attempted murder indictments that ended up with him being charged, right? And convicted until it's set aside.
Right. Well, do you want to know the ending, and then I'll go back through why I find all this so fascinating? Sure. Okay. The family loses it at this point. Now, Cosima is Sonny and Klaus's daughter. She had stayed on her father's side. She did not believe that Klaus would kill Sonny. She did believe they might be headed to divorce, but she didn't believe that there was any chance Klaus had tried to kill Sonny. So as a result of that, the family, Sonny's family, including the children and her grandma, they disinherit Cosima. and they remove her from the will. Like when you're disinherited, it has to be specifically stated in the will in some jurisdictions that you are not to get any of the family fortune. This comes out in May of 1984 when Anna Laurie Aiken, who's Sonny's mom, passes away. She is out of the will. In July of 1985, this would have been about 10 days after the second trial where Klaus von Bülow is acquitted. The two kids, so we have Anna Laurie, she's known as Alla, and then Alexander. These are the kids from Sonny's first marriage to the prince. They file a $56 million lawsuit against Klaus on their mother's behalf. You have to remember, she's in a coma still. She's been in a coma since all of this began, and she's going to stay in a coma for a very long time. On December 24th of 1987, that part of the case gets settled out of court, and Klaus agrees to divorce Sonny, who's still in a coma. He gives up all claims to her fortune, which at that point in time was estimated to be worth around $40 million. And Klaus agrees to leave the country voluntarily. In exchange, Cosima is reinstated into Anna Laurie's will and all the trusts that her grandmother had left for the other kids. Now, she ends up getting $30 million as her share of the trust from her grandmother, not Sonny, but Sonny's mom's estate. So at this point in time is when the National Victim Advocacy Center is founded. At the time, it was named the Sonny von Bülow National Victim Advocacy Center, and they founded it out of Fort Worth, Texas. It's currently known as the National Center for Victims of Crime, and it's headquartered in Washington, D.C. They also founded the Sonny von Bülow Coma and Head Trauma Research Foundation in New York. Sonny remains in a persistent vegetative state until her death from cardiopulmonary arrest on December 6, 2008. At the Mary Manning Walsh Nursing Home in New York City. At her memorial service, which her three children who have since sort of reconciled, they hold the memorial for her on January 14th, 2009 at the Brick Presbyterian Church in New York. This is the same church where Sonny and Klaus got married. Sonny was then buried at the cemetery at St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. For Klaus's part, Klaus actually lives a really long time, but he lives in London, England. He doesn't die a pauper or anything like that. I had mentioned this before, but in the series of Unfortunate Events books, Klaus and Sonny Baudelaire are named after Klaus and Sonny von Bülow. And in 1990, a film called The Reversal of Fortune, which is about this case and all of the fallout, starring Jeremy Irons as Klaus. It's released, and Jeremy Irons ends up winning the Academy Award for Best Actor for playing Klaus von Bülow. So he wins an Oscar for this. And Klaus finally dies May 25th, 2019, at his home in London, England. I thought this was a really interesting story. I believe all of the kids are still alive. I would have to look that up to be sure. Cosima's still alive. She is married to an Italian nobleman. She spends her money on, sort of philanthropic endeavors around the UK. And then obviously the other two founded the crimes. I thought this was one of those cases where it feels so soap opera-y that it doesn't even matter that he was acquitted. Does that make sense?
Well, right. It doesn't matter that he was even charged to begin with. Unfortunately, the story is interesting. The story makes a lot of points, actually, but I feel like this may be the most unrelatable story that we've ever covered.
It really is, in a way, isn't it? It's kind of a break in the middle of all of it because it's so weird and out there, and it's almost like you're talking about royalty. And I guess in some instances you literally are.
Well, at least perceived royalty, sure. It seems to me, though, that the ends being that he was self-exiled, I guess. I don't really know what you would call that. He left and he gave up any sort of claim. To me, that shows the prerogative here, right?
Oh, yeah.
The prerogative was that in the event that their mother died, they didn't want to lose everything. And as soon as he was willing to take his, run out of the race, so to speak, it all went away, right?
Yeah.
It's really, really strange. And it all boils down to money. And they really did give him just hell, it seems like. Now, I have no idea. I don't feel like you're going to do a half job of attempted murder like repeatedly. If your prerogative is actually trying to murder someone, you're not going to keep like doing it so subtly that there's multiple attempted murder situation. You try harder, right? If you're going to do it.
But wouldn't you do something different if it didn't work the first time?
That's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. Like you're not going to do it doesn't seem realistic that it's almost like either they were responsible for it or this was just concocted, right? It was a concocted narrative to go along with the story that they could tell. She lived a really long time in a coma.
Yeah.
Okay. And, that's kind of their bad to the extent that people put her through that because she was she was living by machine, I imagine. That's another situation. You don't hear of people living that long in a coma with life support. It's not a typical thing to have, because we're talking about what? Like she died in 2008. And so that's like 28 years.
Yeah. She's going to stay there for 28 years and he's going to live another 11 years beyond her.
Well, right. And it's a very odd story, but it also speaks to the fact that they were able to get this entire thing happening with what I see as a concocted story. They were trying to get her husband to be put away. Also, by being put away, I presume it would have made it so he wouldn't have any sort of claim towards her estate, right?
Yeah. The whole idea was to separate him and punish him financially. Yeah.
And it's really weird to me that there was so much animosity. I don't really know what it is. I also think you said for some reason I thought her whole family was involved in it, like her parents, but that doesn't make sense for the rest of the story. I think that there can be some underlying, our mom couldn't possibly hurt herself, that kind of thing. Denial, I guess. It would just be overt denial, I guess, that drives.
Yeah.
Different motivations here. It's a big leap to go to murder, though, I think.
Oh, it's a huge leap to go to murder. I mean, okay, look, if your life has gotten to the point, and I'm just going to throw this all out there, that you pop out in a movie. So the movie is narrated by Sonny, and Sonny is played by Glenn Close. So Jeremy Irons, we already talked about, he plays Klaus. Annabelle Sciorra is in here.
So was Sonny back from coma?
No, like the movie story is told from her coma. I mean, even after the fact, I never figured out if Alan Dershowitz, who he wrote a book called Reversal of Fortune, by the way. It's his whole thing that pushes to the movie. I don't think he believed that, like, his client necessarily wasn't involved. So it's interesting how all of this sort of unfolds. In the end, if you want to read more about this, because I'm not going to drag this out forever, but for people that like really want to read more about this, Justia has the 1984 appeal, and it's from the Supreme Court of Rhode Island. It's just a state versus Von Bulow. Now, from what they describe there, this case created 5,200 pages of court transcripts in 26 volumes, and that the initial trial lasted more than 6 weeks for 2 counts of attempted murder.
Attempted murder.
2 counts of attempted murder.
Right. I'm just saying attempted murder. Like, she's not dead.
They tell the story like in the best way possible there. And I pulled some from that Justia document. That's just law.justia.com. If you go on there and look for the state versus Von Bulow, it's a kind of a lengthy read, But it sort of summarizes how we get to the point that, like, the Supreme Court of Rhode Island is dealing with this. And I'll go ahead and tell you that one of the things I kind of left out is there's a lot of drugs involved. And they never really point to what was actually going on with the drugs. And it's not just the drugs that they mention in these other articles and in the movie. There's a lot of stuff. Like, they're trying to figure out how lidocaine fits in. There's Valium. There's drugs from that have French names on them. So, like, the people involved are misidentifying them. There's a lot that happened there. Like, when you look at this case, it is like the epitome of first world problems. My conclusion in all of it was, there is no way this woman didn't just, like, accidentally drop herself into a coma. I think because of her behavior, like what we see in the medical records that they bring up there, which that would also be terrible to be this, sort of highfalutin aristocrat and then have all your medical records dumped out in this 6-week trial. Like, she pretty clearly was miserable with her life. And I honestly think she was miserable with her children. I think she was miserable with her mom. I do not think it was just Klaus. And at the end of it all, I came to the conclusion that she may not have been, like, out and out trying to commit, quote, suicide, although 73 aspirin is a lot, dude. But she didn't care if she made it or not through whatever the next crazy thing she did was. And I do not think these drugs were Klaus's, unless they were his in the guise of Sonny specifically saying, bring me my drugs.
So part of my distinction here between, like, attempted murder versus, like, being charged with an actual crime. So she goes into a coma and, like, she never gets out of it, right?
Correct.
They go back in time. They say, oh, there was this other incident too, right?
Yes.
Okay. So typically, if someone commits attempted murder, okay, the person does not linger in a state between the act having been committed, which would be a murder charge, right? Versus attempted murder, which is like you try to shoot somebody and you miss. Right? Okay. So what part of this is that?
Wait, what part of this is attempted murder?
Right.
Well, they're saying, and I'm paraphrasing, they're saying he knew her so well and wanted her money so bad that he started to incorporate into her routine of the drugs she was using and the things she used to basically wake herself up and put herself out, harmful elements where if she would have shot herself up with, and I'm not kidding when I say this, insulin instead of lidocaine, then the potential was there for the insulin to kill her. And he was just trying to usher her out the door faster to get access to her money. That's what they're saying in the prosecution's 2 presentations at trial. But the truth is, even the prosecution's own witnesses, although they get a conviction at the first trial, they cannot tell who is doing what drugs in this situation. They can only go by what she has in her body. Like, it was crazy because one person would testify, Sonny's an alcoholic. And then another person would say, that person is lying.
Well, and all of that put together, just like you just said, it's still not adding up to attempted murder.
No, but, like, if he was trying to kill her by overdosing her on insulin, it would be attempted murder. They never get there. Even at the first trial where they get the conviction, you can read it. And like I said, it's a lot of pages. They never get to the point where they actually put the insulin in his hand and then have him put it in her body for the purpose of killing her.
Right. And that technical aspect of the situation is exactly what I'm talking about here. Because ultimately she died from the coma that she had been in for all those years. Yep. Right? Okay. Yep. But attempted murder is not a situation where I don't think... Usually the act of the attempt has ended when someone is charged with attempted murder.
Oh, are you saying because of the coma aspect?
Well, right. I'm saying that like none of it makes sense because they didn't even know the outcome of what the allegations were yet.
Yeah, I follow you there. But like, so if you had shot her in the head and she ends up in a coma, they don't know the outcome. They could charge him with attempted murder or assault with a deadly weapon with the intent to kill.
Assault with a deadly weapon, or they could see what the prognosis is, and when she died, charge them with murder.
So you're saying charge him with like...
I'm just saying that this doesn't follow that.
But it could have been poisoning charge? Is that what you mean?
I mean, yeah, I'm saying that it doesn't line up with what I
attempted,
have. What I have in mind. He was charged and convicted until it was overturned of attempted murder, but I don't think there were any underlying charges. This is a complete, like all of it is a completely made up situation.
It really is. And I thought it was like a good break from like, since we were kind of trashing everybody, honestly, I think this was a suicide attempt by Sonny Van Bulow. I say that because between Thanksgiving and Christmas of that year, she had medical intervention for what to me and everything I know can only be described as either the world's worst headache or a suicide attempt. You can take that for what you want, but shoving down a bottle of aspirin at that time in that milligrams that they were talking about, it would have had 100 pills in it. Say she'd taken a few of them. She somehow took 73 of them.
Okay, so you feel like she attempted suicide because I feel like she committed suicide.
Yeah, she may have committed the world's slowest suicide here.
And so that's where I'm getting at with like the whole attempted murder thing. There's nuances there that I understand fall in the cracks of this very, very just these aren't real problems, right? I mean, you have a person who was, an heiress socialite with too much money, who had first world problems coming out of her ears, who didn't want to live anymore. That's what it seems like, right?
Yeah.
And no matter how you paint that, it doesn't really change that underlying thing. And so it's the attempted murder. If we're going to go like down the path towards like the law and going to court and trying to get justice, the charge doesn't even fit in my opinion, because like you were saying about her, like, attempting suicide. Well, it wasn't just that she attempted suicide. She committed suicide, unless there's something in between the time this happens and her dying. Right. Yeah. And so to me, it's maybe it's just I think that it might illustrate my other point, which is like the class differentiation of like all the things that went into play here as far as like having this come to fruition in a trial, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to all the justice that's not ever gotten by people sometimes. Because this is in the 80s. It's not like it's, it seems like it should be longer ago than that, but
like 300 years ago.
I know, right? That's what it seems like. But it's not that long ago, so it may just further illustrate the fact. My point is, most of the time in these types of situations, the ending would have to occur. Right? Like,
yeah.
And attempted murders are typically things that like the person's not being tried for it while the victim is still hanging in the balance. Right?
Yeah.
It's a weird combination of things that are happening.
Yeah. I feel like he ends up sort of making up for it in life, but I do feel like Klaus gets a little screwed here. First of all, I think if you're seeing someone for 2 years and there's this time where your wife goes into a coma, maybe it's time to like take a look around and take stock of your life and be like, what am I going to do if something happens to her? But I don't think he ever like looked at it and went, well, I could be accused of her murder or her attempted murder.
I mean, I can see where that lines up for a motive, but I don't know that his seeing this woman had anything to do with anything beyond the fact that it was just a convenient feature of that they could point to.
Oh, yeah. No, you're right. Well,
especially just I'm talking about like more of just like the actual technical side of this, and the fact that like if this was not a rich heiress, you're not looking at a situation where any of this is happening.
I you know what? I don't know what to say about all this. I picked it because I thought this is the biggest waste of everything. Time, resources, energy. I mean, thank God the kids kind of did some stuff, but like they're sort of the catalyst for this.
I was going to say, I feel like the kids are the catalyst, and I feel like they were driven by the fact that I don't know that you came across anything. Was there information that had she died, none of this court stuff happening, would he just get everything?
Yeah, if she had died, they were still married and living as husband and wife. So everything, he would just have inherited her estate. And on top of that, except for certain provisions, he would have inherited a piece of her family money.
Well, right. And well, so that would be if she died either with that and her wishes and her will, or intestate, right? If she died intestate, then now, again, this is not as long ago as it seems like it should be. When we start talking about Aristotle, whatever, how do you...
Aristocracy.
Like, to me, it seems like we should be talking about like the 1500s, right? When you start talking about situations where you have adults that have adult children who are from different other partners, so like they have different fathers, basically. In some state, the laws are different with regard to just the husband getting everything. And so I don't really know how that would have affected the situation here, but I bet if you really drilled down on it, their whole prerogative was to make sure that they were keeping the inheritance. And I feel like that's really sad.
Yeah, their kids were young. I think they were 20 and 21 when this happened to her. Like they had been born in 58 and 59 respectively. This happened in 79. So they're young when they're doing this. So they're in their 20s. They actually went first to, like, you're completely right on a couple counts. They went first to the family financial advisor, and they're like, what happens to our trust? And what happens to our, like, you know, our inheritance if something happens to her? And that guy was like, well, you know, a lot of this, the way it's set up, would just go to Klaus. But you would still get things from your grandmother. And at that point in time, they were like, what can we do to make sure that, like, he's not cutting us out? And one of the things that he listed off was, you can talk to my friend who's a prosecutor in New York, and he can, like, dig deep into this and see what's happening there, see if there's some angle on this. And I think that's how it went down.
Why does that even come up, right? It's a weird...
It came up because you got 20-year-old millionaires asking questions.
I understand that, but, like, that wouldn't come up today.
It shouldn't, no, but...
I mean, again, we're not talking about the 1500s, right? We also don't have this distinction here, I don't think. I mean, maybe we do, and I'm not aware of it. But I feel like this was a pretty particular situation. How much money are we talking about?
Do you mean overall, or like that they would stand to lose, or what?
I don't know. So, like, I don't have a good grasp on it.
So the timing of it, remember, it's the 80s. So at the timing of all of this, Sonny's estate at that time was worth $40 million, and she had another $20 million in trust, and she was set to inherit, I want to say, about $100 million from her mom. So just take all of those numbers, and because I know later when grandma's trust is, like, split up, it was $50 million going three ways at that time. And so she had 150, but it wasn't all going to go to Sonny. But figure it's 1980, and these people are probably worth somewhere between 150 and $250 million.
I feel like Sunny had a really sad life. It seems like everywhere she turned, like she, married the broke royalty, right?
Yeah.
Ended up not being worth anything to her. I mean, because maybe they were in love. That would be great. But maybe also they were trying to get their status back.
Could be, yeah.
Right? Because, the bloodline, if it's not handled correctly, a royal bloodline doesn't just automatically have money, right?
Right. Well, they were probably worth, if you look at inflation calculators, and I know you don't like to do that, in today's money, just to compare it to something, somewhere around $500 million.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like it was enough, even less than that, I would say. I think that you can have a very short-sighted view of what you're doing for self-preservation, because he wasn't their father, right?
Right.
He was only one of their fathers. And the one that
he was, yeah, they had kind of disinherited her a couple of different ways. But yeah, they were not talking to the person who had supported them, who was their stepsister.
Half-sister.
Half-sister.
Right. Okay.
Who was their half-sister.
Right. Okay. And, to me, that speaks volumes because it wasn't their father. There's always going to be contention. It's a very interesting story. He lived a very long time, and then there was no further drama, right?
No, he left and he lived to be 92 years old, and he passed away. That would be a weird life, though, I'll tell you that.
There's nothing there was never anything normal about any of that situation.
Yeah.
None of it's normal.
Yeah, well, that's all I got on this one. I like doing these stories every once in a while that are a little weirder than like our normal gloom and doom. So that's how this one makes it. Yeah.
I gotta say that I got really hung up on the fact that like there's all this happening on attempted murder charges.
Well,
it was weird.
I mean, this would, like, I know there's already been a movie made about Dershowitz's book on this, but like this would make a fascinating Netflix series. Like it would be really crazy to see how you get these type of people who, in my mind, they sort of fall in the sociopath realm where everybody's headed towards just blowing all the resources of a 1980 6-week trial in Rhode Island. That is just crazy to me. Like so much money just flying out the window at that trial
for an attempted murder charge where the person is still lingering in a coma. But it doesn't make sense.
But both incidents did happen at Christmas, so it is tied to the holidays.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrattiCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
The season twinkles under starry skies, and Kris Kringle's drinking cherry wine. How I wish you were here to stop
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at truecrimeaccess.com. Thank you for joining us.
This is just a reminder that we are part of the Zencastr Creator Network, and I've put a link in the show notes if you guys want to check it out for your own podcasting needs. I've always enjoyed using Zencastr. Their quality is great, and we were able to join their Creator Network at kind of a key time in their history. I have enjoyed it. I've considered a lot of other places to record and a lot of other ways to put together and host and distribute our podcast. But I've stuck with Zencastr the longest. We've been with them for hundreds of episodes now. And I'm putting a link in the show notes where you can check out what they have to offer and see if it's something you would want to use.